This is my mother, Polly Kinnison, in the purple. And then my Aunt Grace, who is in the white sweater. Two sisters that are going to talk to us today.
Tell us about your parents. First introduce them.
My father was Charlie Lawrence Heddin, and he was born in Van Zandt County in 1897, I think it was. My mother
92.
was 92, yes.
Yes.
Mama was born in 97, I think. Anyway.
And your mother was?
My mother was Elsie Almeida Thornton. She was born in Van Zandt County too, I believe. I know she was.
And she went by Meady, right?
Went by Meady, and everybody called her Granny, that her grandchildren do. Mm-hmm. But they moved to Amarillo about 1925, if I remember correctly. And when they moved, I'm not real sure about all these dates, but I know he worked in the oil fields for several years. Then we moved to Amarillo in 1928. And Nolan, she had 5 children at that time. I was the 5th.
There was Nolan, Edna, Ruth, Judy, Pauline, better known as Polly, and Maxine. There was Bill, and myself, and Elsie.
All 3 born in Amarillo, right?
Right. They've all passed except Polly and I.
So, Polly, you were how old when you moved to Amarillo?
I think I was about 5 when we moved to Amarillo. And I don't have many memories of childhood. My earliest memory is when we lived on Moore Street. I think that's where Grace was born.
No, I was born on Fillmore in 1932. Polly, where were you born?
I was born in Corsicana, Texas.
In what year?
1923. September 19th.
So you're 9 years apart.
Right. 9 very good years.
Yes.
Polly was my idol. Everyone has to have someone to look up to. And Polly was the one I had to look up to. And she's lived up to every imagination I could have had of her. So.
Wow. So do you have memories, Polly, of taking care of Grace when she was a baby?
I can remember her, but I don't remember us taking care. I remember when we lived on Moore Street, there were 60 children on that one block street. Mm. And, of course, we all played together. Edna and Ruth were always the bosses, and we played house. And, of course, there's all sorts of games when you've got 60 kids in one block. But
kick the can and hide and seek were always the favorites.
Yes, and Annie over. And
yeah.
Then when I was 9, we moved to Fillmore Street. That's when you were born.
Yes.
And we got our first roller skates for Christmas that year. We didn't get Christmas presents. They had a program at the City Auditorium where Santa Claus came and gave each child an orange and an apple and a toy. And that was Christmas. And if we got any toys at home, I don't remember getting that except the skates. And Nolan bought those, we learned later. But we used to skate up and down the street. We had one man that worked in the nights, and he'd yell out at the one, and I don't blame him. Kids bother him, he's trying to sleep in the daytime.
Get those kids off the street.
Yeah. Then, well, anyway, we went to Buchanan School. Walked, I think, about 5 blocks. Snow or shine. We never wore slacks. We had big old ugly black socks and dresses.
Yeah, with high-top shoes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Polly remembers the night I was born. Like she said, she was 9 years old. And I was told, somehow I don't remember it, but I was told that Papa took all the older kids out to the garage and they had to spend the night out there.
That's true.
They had no idea what was happening until the next day, and there was a new baby there. And they were told, that the doctor had brought her in the black bag.
Yeah. And I'm 9 years old. I didn't know where babies came from. I was 18 when I found out where babies came from. We didn't have sex education and things like that in those days. But church was the highlight of our week. I can always remember walking to church. Papa had the youngest one on his shoulders. And
That would have been me at that time.
at that time, well, that was when even when we lived
No,
on
Bill
Moore
was
Street.
probably the one riding on the shoulders at
Yeah.
that time.
But anyway, we went Sunday morning, Wednesday night, Sunday night, and that was the life we lived and loved it.
We did.
And as teenagers, we had BYPU, Baptist Young People's Union, and there was a lot of teaching as well as entertainment there.
That was our entertainment.
It really was.
We didn't go to movies much. And of course, there was no television. Some radio.
The radio we had was one that Nolan built with those little crystal sets.
Mm-hmm.
And the radio we had was up on a shelf where all these little kids couldn't reach it. Because you got, by then, I think Elsie was born.
No, she wasn't born till Grant Street.
That's right. But that's
Yes.
when I remember the radio up on the shelf,
Mm-hmm.
listening to the Shadow Knows.
Right.
And Ma Perkins at noontime. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Would you all gather around and
Oh,
watch
we
it
sat
together,
down with
listen
the
to
radio on the, all around.
Yeah.
And Sundays, we had our big dinner, of course, all the time at noon. Sunday night, we had hot rolls for dinner.
You know, those are treats.
Yeah, that was Sunday night dinner.
And we sometimes had leftovers that had been left out on the table with a tablecloth over it.
Yeah,
That, of course, I don't remember all of that.
yeah.
After I got up older, I remember that's
Yeah.
what we did.
But Papa worked as an automobile mechanic, and the garage he worked for was just down the street from us, and we used to skate down there.
His first job in Amarillo was at Plains Chevrolet, which is still in existence. And there, I have a picture, and there must have been 50 employees in that, or maybe more. There were a lot of guys there. And from there, he went to the Yellow Cab,
That's right, Yellow Cab.
and he worked for Mrs. Hicks until the wartime, and then he went to Pantex, working as a mechanic out there.
And that's when things started looking up for the family. Before that, we were on what they call relief. It
Got
wasn't
our food
welfare.
from the commissary.
You go down. We didn't know we were poor. Everybody around was the same way.
We had red beans and cornbread,
And
black-eyed peas.
all kinds of vegetables. Papa always had a garden. And Mama always had a pot of beans on the stove. Any hobos that came to the door,
Mm-hmm.
they got what they wanted. Always something to eat. Never turned anybody down.
Hmm.
Don't you remember anything about your childhood?
I can remember I was about 7, and Tabby Sue Walker, my girlfriend, had broken her arm. And to straighten it, she had to carry a bucket of rocks around. And we'd go around picking up the rocks to put in that bucket.
So it would get heavier and heavier.
Yeah, and that helped straighten her arm.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Attraction.
But we didn't have toys. We made them out, out and sit and play in the. We didn't have grass either, so you just got dirt, so you sit and play in the dirt.
And sometimes you would eat part of that dirt.
Probably. But Buchanan Street School turned into Horace Mann. And that's what's Horace Mann School now. We passed that today going out to Wade's house. It's now Horace Mann. It was Horace Mann Middle School, so they must have other schools for that now. But
And our church was what was then Pierce Street Baptist Church. And now it's,
2nd Street,
no,
no,
Second Baptist. rather than First Baptist,
Yeah.
it's Second Baptist.
When they first built this church, we had services in the basement area,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I was converted.
Right.
And I don't remember ever going into the church. We moved out to 14th Street before that church was finished.
Mm.
But
And
Reverend
how
Harton.
old were you when you were saved?
When I was 9, I thought I was.
Okay.
Like the preacher said this morning, you walk down
You
the
don't
aisle.
understand. You
But
don't
when I-
understand it, but
Yeah.
who says you have to understand it?
But I was 12 when I really let Jesus into my heart.
Mm.
And
And how about you, Grace?
Conversion are childhood stories. We don't have all night.
Well, when were you baptized?
I was 12 when I was baptized. Well, I was
Okay.
baptized when I was 9.
Okay.
And then when I was really converted, I went up to Brother Harton, and I said, I need to be baptized. He said, well, you were baptized before. And I said, but I wasn't saved then. So he baptized me again.
No, I was saved when I was 9 too. We went to Line Avenue Baptist by that time. We had moved to 14th Street. And one morning, my mother called me into the bathroom. And boy, I thought I was going to get it because that was where the razor strap was. But rather than doing that, she said, we need to have a talk. And so she asked me to kneel on the john. We put the toilet seat down and knelt by the toilet. I have had many prayers in that position over the years. And she talked to me. I pretty well understood what it was all about because having been, watched my older brothers and sisters go forward. And one morning I can remember we had come back from church at Pierce Street Baptist. And Brother Horton talked about accepting Christ as Savior. And so while Mama was making dinner, that was the middle meal. Dinner is the middle meal. Remember, lunch is not biblical. So I told her it bothered me, and I was talking to her basically about some of the things I had done wrong. But she says, I believe the Holy Spirit is working with you. And of course, at 6 years old, you really don't understand what the Holy Spirit is all about.
I thought you were
But
9.
I was 9 when I was baptized.
Oh, I see.
But when the Holy Spirit started talking to me about little fibs, or as Mama would say, don't tell me no stories. So that was when I really started thinking about accepting Christ as Savior. And then later, when I was 9, Mama took me into the bathroom. And the next Sunday night, Pastor Jack Sizemore came forward and he said, I was in my study and the Lord told me there's a couple of children up here who hadn't accepted Christ as Savior. And he said, he prayed with us. And he said, have any of you prayed that prayer for the first time? And I raised my hand. And another little girl, my same age, raised her hand. And of course, we were in training union. We didn't go to Baptist training. No, ours was BTU, Baptist training.
Yeah.
And so she said, well, the other little girl that raised her hand, he said, well, I want you two to come forward tonight if you really mean this. And she said, well, I have to talk to my mother about that. And I said, my mother did talk to me about this. So then the next Sunday night, I was baptized at Line Avenue Baptist. But that wasn't my first experience, my earliest memories of church. But like Polly said, church was the center of our family. Papa took us to church, and my earliest memories was of Papa. Well, we were on our walking from Pierce Street Baptist Church to Fillmore Street, our home. We would walk back and forth to church. And I was about 3 years old, and I got tired. You know, short little legs. I'm still short, but I had shorter legs. So he picked me up and carried me the rest of the way home. And, you know, I can still remember being carried at my papa's. You cut it.
Oh, that's sweet.
It sounds like you had a very loving
We did.
daddy and mother.
One thing in our family, we never kissed and hugged like we do now. It wasn't cold, but we just didn't have the close relationship that we have now.
But you knew there was love.
Yeah,
They never really said, I love you, per se, but you knew that they did.
Yeah.
That there was the love that was unspoken. So,
when I went to Amarillo High School the last year of school, rode the bus, and I was the only child out of the 9 that graduated from high school. And that was with the help of my older brother. And of course, after Papa started working for Pantex then, so we had a little more money. But I graduated from high school and had planned to be a nurse. But then you had to go to college to get your nursing degree, and I had not taken geometry. So I had to go back to summer school to get geometry. This was in 1941. And the war started. And I went to work and got not a good job, but I was making 25 cents an hour. And that was a lot of money for a 17-year-old girl. And December the 7th, we were in church. It was just before church that we heard about the war starting. And
Polly, it was after church. I have deep remembers.
well, yeah, it was after
Now,
church.
It was after church.
They-
Papa was laying on the couch taking his afternoon nap, and the newspaper boy came down the road yelling, "Extra, extra, Pearl Harbor is bombed."
Well, I wasn't home. I was out somewhere
Right.
with a couple of friends. But,
And Dad was there then.
no, Dad was in Hawaii. He was
Right.
at Pearl Harbor.
That's
Jack.
what-
Yeah,
that's
he
what
was.
she-
We were not
That's what I
married
mean.
then.
He was in Pearl Harbor, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
did you think about him?
Oh yes, we didn't know. We were
No.
engaged at the time. I got he sent me a wedding ring and engagement ring, and I got it just, I think, a few days before Pearl Harbor. And we had never proposed really, but it was just an agreement that we'd get. We had dated when I was in high school. We had 6 dates, I think. And then he went, in 1939, he and his brother and cousin went to Hawaii in the Army, Air Force it was at that time. And it was 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor that we knew whether they lived or died. There was no television, no communication. And his cousin was killed Pearl Harbor Day. And he stayed over there another year. And he came back and we were married 6 days after he got home. Hadn't seen each other in 2 years.
Jack had been our paper boy over there on North Grant, and he would stop and flirt with Polly a little bit, you know. Didn't care about those other guys down the street that would wait for their paper. So I would stand and watch them until Polly would say, "Grace, go in the house." Then I'd watch him through the door.
I was 15 at the time.
I mean, through the window.
Yeah.
And why would you watch
I wanted to see what was going on, because I thought Jack was the most handsome man I'd ever seen in my life.
I did too.
He was a handsome man.
And we had 3 children. Dale was born in 1943. Jack was born in 1946. And Lori was born in 1958. Jack stayed in the service 25 years. And he retired in 1965. We moved to Long Beach, California. And stayed, 6 months. Then we decided to come back to Amarillo. And we came back to Amarillo just to visit. And then he decided to go back to college. So he went to West Texas State for 3 years. 3 years. He had about 15 hours of college in military courses. Then he finished a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in 3 years in science. And he taught school for 8 years after that. And then after he quit teaching school, we moved to Mississippi. Stayed there working for a ear, nose, and throat clinic for 3 years. And that's when we moved back to California, 1980. He said, that's our last move. And it was his last move. He died on November 28th, 1988, 2 days before our 46th wedding anniversary.
And Grace?
Where do we start?
When did you marry?
And where'd you meet? Start with that.
Well, I rather tell you about some of the things I remember when I was a kid.
Okay.
About Polly's skates that Nolan had given to her. They became my skates. One day she was in the bathroom. She had told me I could have those skates, and she wouldn't let me have them. So she told me I was going to get them for my birthday or something. She's in the bathroom, and I said, Polly, I really want to go skate with the rest of the kids in the block. And like she said, that was part of our entertainment too, our playtime. So she said, okay, you can have them if you leave me alone. Get away from that door. It happened. Of course, Vicki tells me I make up stories just to be talking.
I don't have the memory that Grace has. Which
now I lost it.
The skates.
But we moved to, she gave me the skates, and we skated up and down the sidewalk. Our sidewalk ran from one end of the street to the other, one block, and the blocks were pretty long. And everybody else had skates, so I had to have skates. I was about 4 years old then. So I started roller skating when I was 4 years old. And we did go to the roller skate. Didn't you go to the roller skating
Oh,
rink?
we went to go to the roller rink, yeah.
Roller rinks,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. They didn't have ice skates, ice rinks. We had roller rinks.
Yeah.
And that was a fun thing. So,
well, if you were 4, I was 15.
yes.
We lived on 14th Street when I was 15.
I thought you were 9 years older.
I am 9 years older.
Maybe 13.
13, yeah. We lived on Grant Street then.
Right. So, she was talking about how old she was when she learned where babies came from. I learned where babies came from when my little sister was born, when I was 4 years old. I heard this sound of the baby, you know. Mama says, well, if you look under those covers, you'll find out where that sound is coming from. So I looked under the covers. I never did really figure it out until later on because it was dark under there.
Yeah.
But I looked up out of those covers, and here's this really tall lady standing up there.
Miss Law.
Miss Law.
She was an English teacher, or school teacher.
But she was also a midwife.
Yeah.
And she had delivered
Elsie.
Maxine and Bill. So I looked up at her, and she said, what's your name? I said, Grace. And she said, is that what they call you? I said, yes. And she said, well, it's a good thing because you were named for me. She said, I'm Miss Grace Law. And so about that time, Papa and Edna came back. They had been next door to call the doctor. But undoubtedly they had called her first because she was there first and she helped deliver Elsie. And Elsie was born 6 weeks early, and she weighed 3 pounds and 6 ounces.
Something like that.
She was very small, and I can remember just a tiny baby. And they ran me out of the room. Could not understand why I had to leave the room. Papa built a little box, an incubator, and put that baby in there and kept her warm in the oven
With a light bulb.
with the light bulb. Well, he
But just once he had to put her in the oven.
yeah, just once. When
She was blue when he
Yeah.
woke up in the night. He put her. We had the oven with the stove with the oven on the side. He turned the oven on, opened the door, and put the baby in there to keep her alive. She lived to be 72. Wait,
Yeah.
about 4 feet 10 inches tall.
She's always teeny.
She was always my little sister.
Yeah,
Yeah, she was always Mama's baby girl.
Yeah.
So she never grew very big.
oh,
But then we moved. Oh, Polly, do you remember Jiggs? Nolan's dog was white.
not really.
Well, Nolan had a dog named Jiggs, and of course, all of our dogs were mixed breed, good mongrels. So one afternoon I came home and that dog was very sick. Someone in the neighborhood had put out broken glass and poisoned every dog in the neighborhood. So another thing I remember, Nolan had bought gifts for all of us. He was the older brother, and had a job.
He worked
So-
for Western Union at the time, I think.
Well, he had also worked for White Auto,
Yeah.
and so he would always buy Christmas gifts. But he bought me a tricycle, a big wheel tricycle that had a place on the back for a second passenger to ride. And that tricycle, did I say bicycle?
You said
Tricycle. Okay. So one day we woke up and that tricycle was gone, and we found it down the road in the ditch, had been taken apart. So it was not too long after that that Mama decided she wanted to move out of that neighborhood. And by that time, Nolan was working for Fur Food, and he had found this house over on 14th. And so we moved from Grant Street, which was sort of on the wrong side of the street, wrong side of the track, to the semi-country club area. And we may have been somewhat misfits in that neighborhood, because we had 9 kids, and the rest of the people in the neighborhood had no more than 2. I think that was the start of women's lib.
Mom, you were telling me that you and your sisters used to sing.
Yes, they had a Christian program on the radio at 6:30 in the morning, and we sang in the choir at church, and they asked us to go down and sing on the radio. They had a 15-minute program, so we went down to sing 1 or 2 songs. Edna, I think it was Judy, and Ruth was married by then, I think. She married at 17. Maybe not. Anyway, we sang a couple of songs. I think probably 4 or 5 times. So we were famous
In Amarillo.
in Amarillo.
What part did you sing?
I sang soprano. And I remember when I was in the choir, I was singing soprano, and the one woman there who was the boss said, "You need to sing alto." I said, "I don't know how to sing alto." And I never did. I could voice the notes, but it wasn't singing. So I stayed with soprano.
So that was one of the things we did on Sunday afternoon. Mama would play the piano, and we girls would gather around and sing. And my older sisters taught me how to sing alto. So at one time I sang much higher. Basically, it's gone back to alto now. But music was very important to the Heddin family.
Yeah.
Mama played the piano. She wasn't real, she never played in church. I don't remember her playing in church, do you? I was fortunate enough to have come along later, during Papa's more successful years at Pantex, and I was making about $2 an hour, I think, or maybe $1.50. Anyway, more than the 50 cents an hour he'd made before, and so I was able to have piano lessons, and I also went to Girl Scout camp.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Yeah.
Made all the other girls jealous. They thought the younger three were able to have a few more things than the older ones, because, you know, though we didn't like what the war did to our country, it did benefit many people financially.
Right.
I remember our oldest brother Nolan went into was drafted. Their company was activated. He was in the National Guard, and his guard troop, guard group, was activated the day after the war started, and he was sent to
Camp Bowie.
And soon he had 2 buddies that went with him, and very soon after that, these girls followed them down there, who became their war brides.
Yeah.
So, and
Now, Mom and Papa went with them down there to
Yes.
get married.
Right.
It was down at Camp Bowie.
Mhm.
And we were never allowed to wear shorts. I remember while they were gone, one of my girlfriends loaned me a pair of shorts. And when they came home with some coming, I went and took those shorts off as quick as I could.
I vaguely remember that them scampering into the back room and came out dressed a little bit differently. We didn't even wear pants.
Slacks. Yeah, we did,
yeah.
because when I was in high school, we went to our senior picnic. I have pictures of me wearing slacks then. That was just taboo.
But you didn't wear them to school.
No, we didn't wear them
No.
to school.
We never wore. I never wore slacks to school. So, but I remember one thing this gal did to me. When we lived on Grant Street, had this cute little sunsuit, and I was 5, 6 years old maybe, and there was a park just a few blocks from the house, and this was a real hot summer day, and Judy and Pauline took me over to that park, and to test to see how hot the slide was, they let me slide down.
I don't know how you remember all those things.
Well, if you had gotten toasted buns, you might remember it.
Oh,
So, but
well, you asked you about when you married, how you met Sam, and when you married and stuff like that.
well, I met Sam when, Papa died after Nolan came home from the war. Nolan came home in 45, and Vicki had asked about the day Nolan came home. Donnie had been born while Nolan was overseas, and he was about 2 years old when Nolan came home. The war ended and Nolan came home, was one of the first to come back home. And he arrived on a Greyhound bus at the Amarillo bus station downtown. And our sister Judy and Mama, and maybe Maxine was there. No, couldn't have been. Jay was in the service in Mississippi.
Maxine was married by then.
Yeah, they were in Mississippi. So Mama and Papa and Florine and Bill, myself, and Elsie, as many of the family was in Amarillo at that time, went down to meet him. And Papa took Donnie in his arms and was the first to meet Nolan as he got off the bus. And Papa said, "Donnie, who is that?" And Donnie says, "That's my daddy."
Oh.
He had seen Nolan's pictures enough, had never seen him, but he knew that was his daddy. So, but Then Nolan started a pie business after he came back home. And we've been asked how did that all happen? Well, Nolan told us that while he was in the foxholes in Italy, he dreamed of our mama's fried pies. And he came back and started a very successful fried pie business, which went into larger pies and other things. So he was able to support his family.
The first years were a struggle.
Yes, they were.
But it into a very successful business that when he turned it over to his boys in 1978, it was Amarillo's best fried pies.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a girl today saying that she was one of the wives out there. I think it was Monty's wife, said Nolan's fried pies were the best ever.
Right.
But after other people took over the business, it didn't stay.
Well, Charlie took it over for a while.
Well, he and Jerry.
Yeah, he and Jerry
Yeah.
ran the business for a while. Those are Nolan's sons, and it went for quite a little while. There was a big write-up in the paper when Charles decided to end the business. Charlie and Judy worked there for quite a while. So it was very successful. And he was never rich, but supported his family from that business. So, now, someone asked me about when I met Sam. Papa died in 45, not too long after Nolan got home.
He died in October.
Yeah. Nolan came home probably in June.
Right after BE Day. It was BE
Yeah.
Day in June of 45.
So Mama remarried, and we moved to Levelland and then to Lubbock. Mama and Elsie and I lived in Lubbock. And while we lived there, I met my husband, Sam. Met him on April Fool's Day of 1949. We went together 2 months. Then Mama and Elsie and I moved back to Amarillo, and that's when I lived with Polly while Jack was overseas. We split up for 7 months, went together 2 weeks, and got married. And Sam died almost 50 years later, and they said it would never work. We had 3 children, Val, Vicky, Viva, and Van.
That's 4.
4.
Yeah.
We had 3 children and waited 11 years and had 1 more. And our family has given us a hard time about those 4 V's, and they always will. So. Then Sam died in 99, and the Lord gave me a wonderful new man whom I have been married to for 7 years. Yeah. So that's our story.
Okay, could you tell me any of your memories of your grandmother, Julia Heddins?
Vaguely, I remember she came to Amarillo once when I was probably about 7. And I guess it was one of my uncles, was driving the big touring car. I can remember seeing that in the front, but that's all I can remember of my uncles, except Uncle Tom lived in Lubbock, and Aunt Emma when Jack was in the Air Force, and Dale was, I think, 16 months when I remember she was just a baby when we moved there. And Jack's aunt lived next door to Uncle Tom and Aunt Emma. And we had a few meetings with them. And I remember Uncle Tom was a sweet old fellow. And he wasn't that old then, because I was only 22 by then. And we were there 6 months. So that's all I remember, really, of my dad's family.
He was a barber.
Uncle
Yes.
Tom was.
Do you remember if he cut your dad's hair or?
No, I don't remember that.
Okay.
I'm certain he didn't, because we never went to Lubbock. We never got out of Amarillo. When I was 4 years old, I rode the train to Abilene with Mama to see her mother, who was passing away. But, you know, it was Depression time, and though Papa was a mechanic, we didn't have a car. We would sometimes borrow a car, but he didn't own a car. We were like the cobbler's kids, you know. Cobbler had a lot of shoes,
Yeah.
worked. The kids had no shoes, but we didn't have cars, so we didn't go. And if we did go, it was by train. Polly, did you ride the train when you were little?
We never went anywhere. We rode the streetcar downtown, but Papa did go home when Grandma Julie died.
1937.
1937.
Well, I don't remember riding the streetcar, but I do remember riding the bus when we were, well, all our lives we rode Amarillo City bus.
I think the streetcars had been taken out by then.
That's what I seem to remember. But many times we walked from Grant Street downtown. Walking was a good means of exercise. It
Well, I
still
walked
is.
27 blocks to high school.
Right.
27 blocks
Was that when you lived on?
on Grant. When we lived on Grant. Well, he wants to advance to away from the childhood now. Well, Grace married. You lived in Abernathy, Texas, didn't
Yes.
you? And then you moved to Washington.
We were living in Seagraves, Texas. Well, I married Sam on January the 12th of 1950. And then we lived in Abernathy, Texas at that time. And then moved to Seagraves when Val was about almost 2 years old. No, that was in 53. We moved to Seagraves in 53, and then we moved to Oregon in 53. Yeah, we only lived in Seagraves a few months. Vicki was born when we lived in Seagraves. Then we moved to Oregon, sight unseen, and liked it so much we just stayed. We went up there to be farmers. Sam had been raised in Oklahoma on a farm, and he always said, you can take the boy out of the country, but you can never take the country out of the boy. And that was his life dream, to own a farm. So his sister and brother-in-law had bought a farm close to Oregon City, south of Portland, and we moved there, but that didn't work out, so we moved to Cascade Locks and lived there about 9 years. And
That was in Washington or Oregon?
Oregon. Yeah, Cascade Locks, Oregon, in the Columbia River Gorge. And then we moved to Longview, Washington in 65, summer of 65. And then Van was born the next February. So we had 4 children, wonderful children. Of course, I have to say that since Vicky's sitting here. But the Lord has been good to us. And He gave us a wonderful family, wonderful Christian family, and we have preachers on all sides of the family. And Pauline's son, Jack, has been missionary to Thailand for how many years? Paul?
36 years.
36 years.
And he's just come back. He'll retire in a year.
Yeah.
And they don't ever retire, though. They just leave the mission field.
Well, he told me they come back and be DOMs.
Usually. Director of mission. Yeah.
So he's a wonderful man. And then we have another nephew, Nolan's oldest son,
Donald.
is Assembly of God minister. He no longer pastors a church, but he's still a wonderful man. Of course, all of our kids and nieces and nephews are great kids. We don't have any outcast.
Very loving family.
Really, yeah. And our reunion yesterday was just fantastic.
Right.
Of course, all of our brothers and sisters are gone. The last family reunion we had was in 1983. And it was rather stressful and some conflict. And we never really wanted another one. But then this one wasn't planned to be a family reunion. The four of us were coming out just to visit Donnie and Charles and all, some family. And
Then the word got to me and it spread.
I called you and I told you we were coming. And I said, you want to go? And so she decided to go. Well, anyway, it just accelerated. So we had, I think it was 35 people there yesterday.
Said and they all cried when they saw Polly and Grace. They were so happy to see them. They all loved them so much. You could tell, at the reunion yesterday. It was a very emotional time for a lot of them.
Yeah, we hadn't seen a lot of them since they were little kids. But especially Billy's daughter Debbie, who came. We visited with them quite a bit when their kids were little. And we always came back to Amarillo about once a year. And my children, Nola's children, were bosom pals. The years that we lived here, 1966 to 69, Lori and Ginger, Nolan's daughter, were pals. They spend the night together, and that was an emotional meeting yesterday. Of course, we saw them in the reunion in '83, but Grace and Dale and Vicki and I came back in 1998. I think we saw everybody while we were here, but then we went down to see Edna, who lived in South Texas at the time.
In far Texas, and it's a far piece down there.
Near McAllen.
Mm-hmm.
And the day before we got there, she had a minor stroke. And the day we got there, she had another one. And I had planned to stay, we'd all planned to stay about 5 days. Vicki had to leave, so she flew on back, and Grace and Dale flew on back, and I stayed 5 weeks with Edna, and then moved her back to Mississippi to live with us.
California.
To California. We lived in Mississippi from 1976 to 80, and then moved to California. But Edna lived with us 3 years.
They're in the Ripon?
And I live in Modesto. She lived with me and Dale.
Oh, okay.
And she was on dialysis. She had been on that for about 5 years or 2 years before, but she was on dialysis 3 years while she lived with us. And Dale was her caregiver and watched her diet. She took her to dialysis 3 days a week and watched her diet carefully. Which, if Edna wanted a hot dog, Dale said, "Edna, you can't have that." Well, I guess I can. But that was the happiest 3 years of Edna's life. She had a very unhappy, well, she was married 3 times, I think, but the last one was a very unhappy marriage. She stuck it out, and he died in 1994. But everybody loved Edna. She never complained about the illness.
Edna was known to the nieces and nephews as Aunt Abby.
She always came to stay with us when we had her babies. But when I had Dale, she came and stayed 3 weeks. And slept in the bed with me and Jack.
Really?
That was when we went to, after you were about a year and a half old, when he got out of the service. And we moved to, and Edna kept you about 3 weeks. And she got sick. So she brought her up to us in Oklahoma. And we lived in just a 1-bedroom apartment. So the 3 of us slept in that one bed. She only stayed a couple of days. Yeah, close family.
Yeah.
I can remember when I was 9 years old, I think, and Elsie was about 5, almost 6. It was when Jack was stationed at Tinkerfield in Oklahoma City, and Jack and Polly came to Amarillo, and on the train, and then we went back to
Yes.
Oklahoma City. Did you live at Enid or?
We lived in Oklahoma City at the time.
Okay.
He wasn't at Tinker. It was a training school there in Oklahoma out there at the fairgrounds. But anyway, her story is.
Yeah. This was before Dale was born. Polly was very pregnant, and she had to stand up part of the way on the train. That bothered me.
No, that wasn't then. That was before. You came much before that. I came to Amarillo when Jack went down to a school, and he was going to be gone 6 weeks, and he didn't want to leave me in Oklahoma City by myself. You were there before Dale was born.
Right.
Yeah, I had to stand up on the train when we came home. Then you went home with me after that.
Well, I can remember riding the train from Amarillo to Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
And while we were there, Elsie got sick, and there had been a scare of polio. So Pauline called Mama and asked her what to do, and Mama said, send those kids home. So we went back on the train by ourselves. We had a wonderful conductor. He watched us the whole time. He set us back in the back so he could keep an eye on us. He'd make his trips up to the front and then come back and talk with us. And that was my first train ride. No, it wasn't. I was 4 years old when I went to see Grandma in Grandma Thornton in Abilene.
Well, Elsie got sick over eating too much candy. There's really a scare. This was in 1943.
Yeah.
That's when the polio was bad.
Mm-hmm. So Mama thought if she was going to get very sick, she needed her there in Amarillo so she'd be able to take care of her. We were supposed to stay for a week.
Yeah.
And we stayed about 3 or 4 days before we went back. And I remember going to the train station with Polly to get train tickets there in Oklahoma City, and seeing the big oil wells right there on the state capitol, on the grounds of the state capitol. It was an eventful time. I loved riding the train, and I loved staying with Polly and Jack.
When we went to Japan, Jack went over in 1948, and we couldn't go yet. So when we did go over, Dale was 5 and Jack was 3, Jack Jr. And we rode the Santa Fe Zephyr to San Francisco. Then we went over on a ship, 12 days on a ship. Of course, I was seasick the whole time. Dale and Jackie broke out with scabies. They had it in Amarillo before that. You know what scabies is?
I've heard of it.
It's itch. You itch all over. Oh, Billy had been staying with us too then, and he got it. This was in the winter we'd had it. Well, it turns out that we went over in September, and the clothes they had worn when they had the itch, the insect was still in there. So they got it again on the ship. This was 1949. And they had to go in quarantine. And I had to go down to the ironing room and turn all their clothes inside out and iron each seam to get rid of that parasite.
But we got a stateroom by ourselves because of it, didn't we?
Yeah.
Had to move the roommate out.
I was out about half an hour, I guess, at the time. After we got to Japan on my birthday in 1949, September 19th, Jack was supposed to meet us at the ship, and he wasn't there. And everybody else was off the ship, and I thought, what's happened to him? He had to drive from Nagoya, Japan, to Tokyo, and he wanted to get some flowers, so he couldn't find a flower shop.
So he was late. Trying to
Some
find flowers.
excuse.
Yeah. But we were in Japan 2 years. And this was during the occupation time. We came back in 1951, in August 1951. And that's when we went down to see you, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah, went down to see Grace. And I think you had just gotten pregnant with Val,
Val.
because you weren't feeling very good.
Right.
But yeah. Then we went to Warner Robins, Georgia, and we were there 3 years. During that time, Jack went to Greenland, and of course we couldn't go to Greenland. It was icy, isolated country. And Dale and Jack and I moved back to Amarillo and stayed from July until Christmas when he came back. This was 1954.
Tell what happened that May 15th when you were
Oh,
back
the May
in Amarillo.
15th, yes. That's when the tornado struck Amarillo.
That was 1949.
Oh, 49 when we lived here, the tornado struck, yeah.
Yeah.
The first tornado ever in Amarillo. 1949. Well, that's when Dad went to Japan, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's when they had the tornado.
Mm.
And the roof of my house and the windows all blew out.
Mm.
Fortunately, we weren't killed, but our neighbor was. And I think 36 people died in that tornado.
When I first heard about tornadoes, I suppose I must have been about 13 or 14 years old. And you'd hear about them hitting down at Wichita Falls and toward that area. And I asked Mama, do we ever have tornadoes in Amarillo? And she says, oh no, we never have tornadoes in Amarillo. Well, it wasn't too many years later until one hit Polly's house.
Yeah.
I was living in Lubbock. Mama and Elsie and I were living in Lubbock at that time. And we got hit by a tornado that was during that time, the Lubbock area got hit. Lubbock didn't get hit at that time. But since then, this area has gotten hit several times.
Mm.
Lubbock got hit several times, and Amarillo has had tornadoes since then. So you see, you can't always believe everything your mother tells you.
Well, the old Indians always said we'd never have one. Yeah, because we were, on the Cap Rock, and you're not going to get tornadoes. But then when we lived in Enid, Oklahoma, in 1958, when Lori was born there, it was night and day with the lightning flashing on and off. We didn't have a tornado, but they were there. We finally learned just to do what we were doing and ignore it. But since then, they've had some bad tornadoes there.
Tell me what killed your father.
In 1945, he had gallbladder surgery, and by then he was eaten up with cancer. He lived 2 months after they did the surgery.
So they discovered the cancer when they went into the gallbladder surgery?
Yes, before they did the surgery, they sent him home to gain some weight. And then when he went in the hospital, I guess that was about 2 months later, and he didn't live. How long did he live, Grace? In the hospital?
He was diagnosed they had this gallbladder surgery in June, and he died October the 9th?
5th.
The 5th of 45. So it was a short time, but when the doctor opened him, he knew exactly what it was. And that was before the days of chemo or radiation. And I'm certain many of his brothers and sisters could tell you the same thing, that there was no treatment. And the doctor knew immediately that he shouldn't have done the surgery, because once the air hit, it spread like wildfire. And I saw him a few times in the hospital. One time it was, I had gone to town to buy school supplies, and I had 1 nickel left after I bought my school supplies. And so I rode the bus from downtown Amarillo to the hospital on 6th Street. It was Northwest Texas Hospital. And he asked me how I'd gotten there, and I told him. He said, well, how are you going to get home? I said, well, I'm going to walk. He said, no, you get on that bus and you tell them that you're Charlie Heddin's daughter and you want to ride. All the bus drivers knew him because he rode the bus every morning. And sure enough, they gave me a free ride home. So, see, name dropping pays off.
Yeah. Well, somebody sat with him all the time, and I was pregnant with Jackie, and they wouldn't let me sit with him, but I did go one day. And, of course, Mom and Edna sat with him. And just before he died, he looked at Mom and said, I'm going home now, Meady.
He knew. He knew several days before he went. He had told the girls who were staying with him the night before that they should call in the preacher and his family, but they didn't take him seriously, so they didn't. And I heard them talking the night that he died and saying how much they regretted not doing that. I believe that was Edna and Ruth.
Yeah.
So, listen to your loved ones. They usually know when the Lord's calling them home.
Okay, now tell me about when your mother died.
Our mother died in October 29th, 1988. She had been really senile for the last several years and had what they called dementia. They did call it Alzheimer's. And she had congestive heart failure. And in June of that year, Jack and I came home, and I stayed with her 2 weeks. And then we had to go home. And she died, like I say, in October. And my husband we had found out by then he had cancer and was bad. So I couldn't come home. But Grace and Ruth and Edna were here. And of course Nolan and Flo lived here. And they were there with her. She was in a nursing home when she died.
Well, I had come home about two weeks prior to her death. My last memories of Mama was I had come home on a Saturday, and the next day Elsie and I went to church together and came back by the nursing home where she was. And we sang hymns together. We sang, When We All Get to Heaven, and When the Roll is Called Up Yonder. And Mama led us in all the words. She knew more of the words than we did, and we had grown up with those words. So those were precious memories. Mm-hmm. She was a wonderful Christian lady and married a wonderful Christian man. Raised 9 wonderful children, even if I do say so.
Yeah. And she's buried at Llano Seminary, and so is Papa.
Yeah. So that's our story.
Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad to do it.